Have you ever craved a certain food so badly that you couldn't stop thinking about it? When I was pregnant with my first child and living in Nicaragua, all I wanted was cottage cheese, but it was impossible to find. It never occurred to me that I might be able to make it myself. Fast forward a few years, and now with our own milk cows and hundreds of pounds of cheeses aging in our makeshift cheese caves, I've not only mastered cottage cheese, I know how to make it 3 different ways. In this video, I'm going to show you the 3 easiest, tastiest, and most reliable ways for making cottage cheese at home.
That tastes like cottage cheese. That's the best one so far.
So you'll never be without cottage cheese, no matter where you live in the world. This first method gives you the most control over the final curd size. So for all you large curd cottage cheese lovers, this method's for you. To make cottage cheese this way, warm the milk and then acidify it with some sort of culture. Here, I'm using clabber. Wait about 30 minutes and then add some rennet. Now once the milk is set up, cut the curds into pieces. Use a curd knife to cut them into bigger pieces or a whisk for smaller pieces, and then over the course of 1 to 2 hours, slowly heat the curds to about 113 degrees, stirring occasionally. Once the curds are cooked, drain them and then crumble them up and stir in salt and cream to taste. Now, a 2-hour cook time is a lot of trouble to go to for some cottage cheese, especially compared to the other 2 methods that I'm going to show you. But if you are already making cheese at home, here's a little trick. Next time you're making cheese, simply scoop out some of the curds and set them aside. There's no exact science for when to scoop them out. If you like a fluffier, softer curd, take them out earlier in the process. If you like a curd that is smaller and is more toothsome and more chewy, then wait till they're more cooked before you remove them from the whey. No matter how you do it, once you've gotten the curds, you now have 2 options. You can either put them into a cheesecloth lined colander and let them drain, or you can put them into a bowl with some cold water and wash them to remove some of the lactose and then drain them. Once you have your final curds, you can salt them to taste and then you can lush them up with cream. As the curds sit, they will absorb the cream, so you may have to add more cream in installments, depending on how saucy you like them. This might be a problem for some of you who are making cottage cheese because you want it to be low fat. You can use milk in place of cream, but it won't have quite the same texture or the good flavor, obviously. And just bear in mind that when they have low-fat cottage cheese in the store, from what I have read, they are using thickened skimmed milk to make it saucy. So they're adding some extra stuff there that most home cheesemakers do not have access to. One thing to note about this, the curds are often a little squeaky the first day, but over the course of 24 hours, after you've added the salt, after you've added the cream, they tend to soften a bit. So the benefits of this first method: the curds are flavorful because they have been cultured. They yield a fair bit of cheese per gallon of milk. This method gives you the most control over the final curd size and texture. Because this is a sweet whey, the leftover whey can be used to make whey ricotta, therefore increasing your cheese yield even further. And this cottage cheese can be made with pasteurized milk, but make sure you add calcium chloride first. By the way, if you want to level up your cheese making and get some of the details that are so in-depth, I can't possibly include them all in this video. I've made the ultimate cheese making guide for you. It's free and you can get it at the link below. Now, the downside to this first method are that it's labor intensive, it calls for rennet, which a lot of home cooks don't have in their kitchen, and it requires that you have some basic cheese making knowledge. But this next method solves all those problems. It's quick, easy, and it doesn't even require rennet. To make cottage cheese this way, heat 1 gallon of milk to 120 degrees or above, which I'll explain in a minute. Once the milk comes to temp, add 3/4 cup of an acid. In this case, I'm using white distilled vinegar. The curds should immediately separate from the whey. If they don't, then add a little more acid, a tablespoon at a time, until there is a clear separation. Let the curds rest for 10 minutes or so before draining off the whey. Then take the mass of curds and tear it into pieces. In essence, you are hand shaping the curds, since this type of cottage cheese does not have a defined curd. Now at this point, you salt the curds to taste. You can either eat the curds dry or you can add some milk or cream to them for a more saucy version. It's milky, it's delicious, but it is like a mass of curd. It's not like individual curds.
Here I'm running a test comparing cottage cheese with milk to cottage cheese with cream.
That's not really soaking up.
Kind of matte. They're not curds.
With the cream, tastes good.
Bland, boring.
And it is a really good cottage cheese, especially if you add plenty of cream. I served this to my friends and they loved it, and I used the cottage cheese in a baked ziti and it was fabulous. When I first learned about this method, one of my first questions was, but which acid do I use? So I tried a bunch. I tested bottled lemon juice, I tested apple cider vinegar, I tested white distilled vinegar, and I tested citric acid. Lemon juice and apple cider vinegar both gave the finished product an unpleasant flavor. The cider vinegar was especially gross. I wonder if the lemon cottage cheese could have been used maybe in a cheesecake or something where lemon flavors would be more acceptable, but I don't know. I didn't even try it. I fed both of those versions to the chickens. The citric acid version was fine, but it took a lot longer to acidify and I had to keep adding citric acid. It was kind of neither here nor there. By far, the most efficient was the white distilled vinegar. Now, besides the different acid variations, another thing to consider is what temperature you want to raise the milk to. I read recipes where it goes to 120 degrees. I read recipes where it goes to 180 degrees. I figured out that I prefer the 120 degree because this yields a cottage cheese that is a little more soft, a little more tender. The one that goes to 180 degrees is a little tougher, a little bit more rubbery. It's been cooked more. So to summarize the second method, the benefits are it's fast, it can be made with any kind of milk, and it's super cheap. Now the downsides to this method are that the cottage cheese is a higher temp, and so you've killed off a bunch of the good bacteria. There are no defined curds. It gives you a lower yield. It's a pound or often less. The curds are squeaky and dry and rubbery, and they take about 24 hours to soften. And these are thirsty curds, so you have to keep feeding them a lot of cream or a lot of milk, and they just keep sucking it back up. And then over the course of 24 hours or so, it turns kind of gelatinous.
I've added cream and salt to this. You can see how it's just a gummy. It's like like a paste. So I don't like that at all.
Which could be nice. That could be what you want, but that's not how I consider cottage cheese. In fact, the result is more similar to ricotta. So for this reason, I consider this version kind of a shortcut cottage cheese, and I've taken to calling it cotta cotta, as in cottage cheese. And ricotta, it's cotta cotta. So some people love it. It kind of works. Not really cottage cheese. You might like it. While the first method looks the most like cottage cheese, the second method is really fast to make and, super easy. It's this third method that blew my socks off. When I first heard about it, I was skeptical, but not only did it worked better than the other two methods. It's easier, more flavorful, takes only one ingredient, and it has the trademark creamy texture that I was going after. This method that I'm going to teach you next is my all-time favorite. It's actually what I have in the pot right now, getting ready for tomorrow. To make this cottage cheese, you need to start with clabber. For those of you who are new to this cheese making world, clabber is simply fresh raw milk that has been fermented at room temperature until it thickens. And then once the milk has clabbered, you can use that clabber to culture a new batch of milk. Similarly to how you use some yogurt from a previous batch to culture the next batch of yogurt. Once the clabber is 4 to 5 generations old, then you can either use it as a culture to start a batch of cheese, or you can use it to culture a bunch of milk and make that all clabber and then turn that into cottage cheese. So for this third method, you take some clabber and you stir it into a gallon of milk, and then you let that sit at room temperature for 24 hours until it has thickened up. Make sure that there's some airflow in the container of milk, so you either keep your gallon jar lid cracked or you cover it with a cheesecloth, something. You want there to be airflow.
This is cream and there's milk.
Towards the end of the cooking time, if there are any large chunks of curds, just simply pop them apart with your fingers. You turn off the heat, and then you cover the pot and you let it sit for about 30 minutes. Tip the cottage cheese curds into a cheesecloth lined colander. And now, once again, you have two options. You can either just hang that bag up and let it drain until it stops dripping, or you can rinse those curds in cool water and then hang it up to drain. I've made cottage cheese both ways. If you do not wash the curds,
1 pound, 11 ounces, that's the highest yield yet.
it makes a little bit of a creamier, softer cottage cheese.
Oh my goodness, good. That tastes like cottage cheese. That's the best one so far. I don't even think I need to add cream to it. What the heck? But this is not the official video. This is just me experimenting.
Doing what?
Experimenting. Oh my goodness. That's delicious.
Oh, you just dumped all over the floor.
Then you go like this. If you dump salt on the floor, you go like this.
Mom!
That's what you're supposed to do with spill salt.
Why? Why'd you just add cream to it?
To make it better. Because cream makes everything better. This tastes like real cottage cheese to me.
And if you wash the curds, and it gives a little bit more definition between them.
Oops. Danny, can you come help me?
Either way is delicious, but I kind of think I prefer the washed curd way. It just feels a little bit more, I don't know, defined or something. And there's your cottage cheese, and it should last a week, maybe 2 weeks in the fridge. That's it.
So then I wondered, could I make ricotta using the whey I got from clabbered cottage cheese? On 2 different occasions, I heated the whey to 180 degrees and then I added acid. The first time I used citric acid and the second time I used white distilled vinegar. Both times I got nothing from the whey. There was not any curd that formed. So my answer to the question is no, you cannot use whey for making clabber cottage cheese to make ricotta. Just use it to feed the pigs.
Now, for those of you who are interested in cheese making because you want to be as traditional as possible, here's something that I learned about this version, which I think is fascinating. Back before there was refrigeration, farmers would take their milk and they would dump it into a vat. Often it was a wooden vat or a big kettle or something. In the wood, it would have the clabber naturally in it, that good bacteria that would cause the milk to set up, or they would just add it to the milk. And then they would let it sit for, 24 hours. At that point, the cream has risen to the top and they would scoop that off. And that is like creme fraiche, or it's like sour cream. It's the best stuff. And so they would take that and they would use that to make cultured butter and sell it or use it for themselves. And then the part underneath, which is the skimmed milk and it looks like Jell-O, that's what they would turn into cottage cheese. So it was a really savvy way to make money with the cultured cream on the top, and then you have this protein-packed cheese that they would eat. So I've started doing this, but instead of making butter with the cultured cream, I take that and I set it aside. And then when I have my cottage cheese, I take that cultured cream out of the fridge and I stir it into the curd. And oh my goodness, it is so good. It just has this richness, this decadence that is, you gotta try it. It's so good. Another thing you can do with cottage cheese, once you have the curds, you can beat it with an electric mixer and turn it into like a creamy soft cheese, similar to cream cheese, but it's milk-based, or similar to a fromage blanc, just a basic white cheese. And you can swap it out for some of the cream cheese in cheesecakes, or you can use it in lasagnas, in baking, in cakes. Spread it on toast, add it to avocado for a protein-packed guacamole type thing. You can do all kinds of stuff with this fromage blanc. And by the way, I'd love it if you would leave a comment telling me how you like to eat cottage cheese. I have a fridge packed with the stuff and I could really use some inspiration. So to summarize the third method, it's high yielding. It gives more than a pound per gallon of milk. It's super creamy, so you don't have to add that much cream back into it. It stays low temp all the way through, so it is considered a raw product. It has all the good bacteria in it. It's extremely flavorful. It is bright and tangy. It's the most flavorful of the 3 methods. And in texture, it is the most similar to what I think of as cottage cheese. Oh, so good. There are some cons. This method requires the first step of making clabber, which could be daunting for some people until you figure it out, and it's super easy. It requires you have raw milk and you have less control over the final curd size, and they tend to be a little bit smaller. So now, if you want to learn how to make clabber so you too can make your 1 ingredient cottage cheese, I recommend you watch this video. And if you want to learn how to make a basic rennet cheese so that you can steal some curds to make a cottage cheese that way, watch this video next.